Good morning, everybody. I am Kristen Holstrom with the Cuspy Queens. I am missing my fellow twin queen, but she will be back next week, so don't worry. But today I am here with my partners, Carrie Block and Dane Holstrom, both managing partners and certified family law specialists. And I am also here with Jack White for part 2 of Money Matters. And today we are going to deal with the property issues and questions. We are going to give you guys what you want, and we're going to get right into it so we can try to address as many of these issues as possible.
So, Jack, in what type of case would an attorney come and recommend that their client hires you?
Well, specifically, I think we're talking more property issues today. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to property, and I love property issues on cases because even as a kid, I love to build with Legos. And I kind of look at a family law case and the property the same way. I'm kind of building a house, building a block, seeing where everything fits. And as it relates to property, we have determination of where the cash is, whose it is. Often we'll have, when I'm brought in, I'll have a business interests that either need to be valued or divided in some fashion. Sometimes I'll have separate property that is really money that comes from before the marriage or maybe is inherited during the marriage. We often need to trace, or I often need to trace where that money came from, where it went to, who owns it, or if it got spent, how it got spent. So there's any number of property issues that can come up in cases I'm involved in, and they're all fun.
And it's many times in my 30 years of doing this, I have clients say, well, property seems simple. You just split everything 50-50. It's community property in California. Is that always true?
It's a common misconception, and I think that's promoted in the media and on TV a lot of times. In standard divorce, when you see it on TV, it says, well, we're getting divorced, I get half. That's not necessarily the way it is. It could be close, and sometimes it's not close at all. It really depends on the facts and circumstances, and that's why you need a good partnership between a forensic and the attorney side to really figure that out.
Okay, so maybe we can, Kristen, get into some specific questions that'll lead us to further discussion.
So our first question is Laura from Laguna Niguel. Hi, Laura. Hi, Queens. I absolutely love you guys. I have a question. My husband started a business before marriage, and we've been married for 15 years. What am I entitled to?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's probably a very simple question, but a very complicated answer. I'll try to make it easy, and then you can add to it if you need to, Carrie or Dane. What I would be looking at is what was the value of the business when they got married, the start of the marriage. What's the value either when they separate or perhaps currently? And did the business increase or decrease? And the community may be entitled to a portion of that increase in value. So if the business expanded a lot, that'd be great. The community might have a large portion of value there.
Now, how would one, I know listeners would ask, is how do they value something from 15 years ago? How do they get that value from 15 years ago, and then how do they get that value today?
Well, it's another great question, and a lot of that is document driven. So I typically, when I'm valuing a business, I want to at least start with a 5-year history of the business. So if we're going back 15 years, I may want to go back 20 to obtain some financial information. Oftentimes that's not possible. So it could be challenging to value it at the date of marriage. Same with date of separation. I want to look at 5 years, and I'd be looking at how profitable the business is. Does it make a lot of money? And we touched on some of that in our last episode when we're adding back all of those personal expenses to the business to see, okay, if we're paying $50,000 a month in personal expenses, that really is a lot of value as it relates to a business. So we want to add that in. We also want to see what kind of assets the business has. Does it have cash or receivables or property? Does it own any real estate? And what does it owe for that matter? Loans. So it's really a potentially complicated, but not overly, complicated at the same time.
So they would hire you, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't know the answer was that easy.
That's my answer.
Yes, you could certainly
you
could certainly hire me. I do have an accreditation in business valuation, so it's right up my alley to take a look at.
Oh, you got super excited about that question.
Well, that was one of the things Carrie brought up on the prior show, was the fact that bring Jack in at the earliest point when you have a case like this coming in, because he's going to know what to ask for.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that on all of our shows, is having the plan, doing the steps, getting everything in place before you actually start the process. It really helps getting the tools, the resources, the experts that you need, instead of just going in blind and hoping it all works out.
Right. It is so much more efficient for me if I have a lot of that information and understanding walking in rather than trying to figure it out halfway down the road.
All right, so we
one of the things that this made me think of that I often get asked by clients in regard to property is when, because a lot of times they separate and maybe they don't get to trial or get to a resolution of the case until a year later. And what happens if the business value or an asset value increases during that time or likewise decreases, and how does that affect what the parties are entitled to?
A lot of that depends on facts and circumstances. It's like, why did the business change?
So what would happen if you had a restaurant that was doing $3 million a year in February of 2020, and suddenly it's doing $50,000 a year in April? For those of you who don't recall, that was when COVID came around.
And we've seen a lot of that, both the restaurants that had to shut down or sometimes businesses that increased. If you were in the hand sanitizer business. Masks. You had a great year.
Clorox wipes.
Right. Lab testing facilities did great during that period of time. So it all depends on what happened and why. As it relates to COVID and what happened during that year, a lot of times what we're seeing at this point, since we're several years down the road, is it made an anomalous blip during that year. And when that happens, a lot of times we'll just ignore that particular year to see what something's worth, only because that's not really representative of what the business is normal. So we just kind of forget it happened.
And then Carrie, in your question, I was like, well, are they really separated too in that year? Are you having romantic involvement? Are you? That's where my head. I know that's a whole separate.
That's
issue,
a whole other show.
That's where my head went. So
no, but I was talking like they're going through the divorce process and all these things happen, and value, just like the housing market. They've gone, and this isn't necessarily something you need Jack for, but the values go up and down, and under normal circumstances, the court is going to look at the value closest to the date of trial, not necessarily the date of separation. So if the real estate market went down, you're just going along for the ride when it goes up or down.
Well, that's one of the points that the court looks at, and the reason. My old example, just to date myself, was if you were a real estate salesperson or a realtor in 2008 when the market crashed and everybody's house was being foreclosed. Now I use the restaurant example of 2020. But those are examples where it was clearly obvious to the world that there were circumstances outside of the owner-operator's control. As what we often get is husband or wife is running a business and they're doing, let's say, $500,000 a year in, year out. It's progressively getting a little bigger every year. No real change in the economy. Suddenly they're doing half right about the time they separate. And that obviously raises the question, why is that happening? Can we attribute responsibility for that to the operating spouse? Or is there some other reason? They lost a big client, something like that. And then the other part of it, is it intentional? So try to avoid paying support or paying what we call an equalization. An equalization is if there's an operator spouse who's running the business that is most commonly, they have to buy out the other spouse's interest. Sometimes this happens with houses and other things like that. And Jack is one of those people that helps define what that buyout price should be based upon his math.
And if you have any questions on any of these issues, property, support, breach of fiduciary duty, please contact us at 1-800-419-7772. That's 1-800-419-7772. Okay, Jack, I have another one here for you. This is Robert from Irvine. And Robert says, we bought a house during marriage and I used my inheritance for the down payment. How do I figure out what's mine?
Well, that's a good question from Robert. in his particular circumstance or fact pattern, it seems reasonably straightforward that inheritance would be considered his separate property, and he's entitled to only that amount back. He does not get appreciation on that money. But that also presumes that he can trace it from wherever it was inherited from into escrow for the property.
Yeah, can you define trace just really
Sure.
quickly so the listeners...
In that situation, just limited to that because there's a lot of tracing.
Yeah. As it relates to tracing of inheritance, what I'd be looking for is there a document of some kind that shows that the money came from a family member or whoever may have passed that shows its inheritance? Can we see it deposited to the original bank account it was deposited to? Do we have the statements? Can we see the transfer from that bank account into the purchase of the house? So tracing for me is showing as much every step of the way that we can. Now, it's not required that we show everything 100%, but we need to do the best we can.
Let me give you an example to see how this tracing works. So in this, what was his name, Robert?
Yes.
So Robert inherits $25,000, okay? He puts it into the husband and wife joint checking account, okay? So now they have $28,000 in their account, okay? They pay their bills, they do normal stuff, the bank balance goes down to $5,000, but then they hit the lotto, okay? And they win $25,000.
I feel like I'm taking the bar exam right now.
And now they've got
getting more
$30,000 in the
complicated as we
account.
go.
They take that $30,000, they take $25,000 out of that, and they put it down on a house. And Robert says, I used my inheritance to buy that house. Is that how the court's going to see it?
I'm sure that's how Robert sees it.
Yes.
But as is often the case, the facts do not necessarily show what Robert wants to show. In what you're explaining is a commingled account. So when Robert put the $25,000 into the joint account, it got commingled with community money, which in of itself is not a problem, because when I do my work, I presume there's two buckets within the bank account. One Robert's money, one community money. But when it got spent, the community money got used up presumably first, but then all Robert's money had to cover some of those expenses, and it's not there anymore. So if he used it to pay for credit cards, to pay for travel, to buy clothes or food, that money...
Well, wait a second. They got the lottery ticket that put the $20,000 back in the account that was spent. Doesn't that make Robert whole?
No.
Well, thank you for that very thorough answer. Sorry, Robert.
Well, his case might be different. We're not talking
No, I know.
his
Not you
case.
personally, Robert.
Yeah.
All right, I have another question. That was a great answer. Everybody listening and watching us, we're trying to keep these complex issues somewhat easy to understand.
And that's a great point. There's often a lot of exceptions or other facts or circumstances that could change some of the answers. So it's really important to really have a good discussion with either your forensic or your attorney or both to really flesh out exactly what's happened. And
Let me give you an example. The $5,000 left in the account, whose money is that? Before he gets the lottery ticket.
well, from our example thus far,
That I gave you,
that's
yes.
probably Robert's money.
Right, because as you said, the community property money would be spent on the community property expenses, so the money left there is Robert. Robert takes $1 out of the bank and buys the lottery ticket and wins $20,000. Now does Robert get his $25,000 interest in the house?
I'm sure a good attorney could argue that.
I just did.
I suspect you may be wrong with your...
Oh, say it isn't so.
I know.
happens.
It happens. Because from property during the marriage, typically, if you acquire something during the marriage, it's considered community. If you've used your separate property monies,
That's my point.
Robert's dollar,
Robert's dollar came out of the money that was left from the tracing that you just proved was his.
right? If he invests that into the lottery ticket, that's a winner.
Yes.
He gets his dollar back.
Whoa!
Hey, he got his dollar.
Sorry again, Robert.
Yeah. Robert's 0 for 2 so far.
Okay.
So everybody listening, if you have any property issue like this, start early. Do not wait. Make the call. Call the Custody Queens. You can call Carrie or Dane at HBP as well. Both websites. You can fill out an intake form. And we will also provide Jack's information if you feel like you have a case that really could use Jack in his specialty. But I have another question from Lydia, who is also from Irvine. We are getting a lot of listeners from Irvine. Love you, Lydia. Hi, Custody Queens. I'm going through the divorce process with my husband and found out that he invested the majority of our savings into crypto, and now it's in the tank. I need that money to live on. What can I do? And thank you for reading my question on air. Can't wait to listen.
I've got that one. I mean, part of it is you've got a lot of nested issues in there. The analysis is really going to come down to, in my mind, the biggest claim that the wife is going to have is breach of fiduciary duty. Breach of fiduciary duty comes when somebody doesn't disclose what they're doing and doesn't. There is not, however, a fiduciary duty called a prudent investor rule. Am I right on that, Jack?
As far as I know, but that sounds like an attorney question.
Okay. Well done. Touché. So the idea is that he lost the money, and I recently completed a very complex trial on these very, very issues, and that wasn't crypto, but it was very, very similar. It was very, very high-risk investments, and we took the deposition of this person, and this person specifically said when he won money, he made sure he told his wife about it, but when he lost money, he always concealed it. And the result of that trial was not good for him, because that's exactly what he did. And that was a breach of fiduciary duty, not because of the risky behavior, it's because he hid the risky behavior from his spouse.
And we talk so much on this show about not hiding things, being open, being transparent, hiring the right people, getting your circle in place before you move forward. There is so much consequence to hiding and concealing rather than being transparent and just going through the process. Trust the process and hire the right people. And you guys, by this time, you should all have our number memorized already. But if you don't, it's 1-800-419-7772.
Now, I wasn't entirely clear from the question. Was it the investment happened during the marriage or happened after they separated?
Yeah, it's not super clear, but it appears, I guess we can speculate, that he invested in the crypto during marriage.
That would be my answer, but that's a great hypothetical as well.
Would that change your answer?
It's $200,000 in the bank that belongs to both of them. They separate. Now husband invests in crypto. What's the outcome there, Jack?
Well,
another lawyer question,
Yes.
but a lot of these transfer between lawyers and accountants, but the easy answer for me is if the money's in the bank and it's community and one person takes control of it, often I can just say, if you took it, we're charging you with the money. What you do with it at that point is on you.
Well, let me get the lawyer component. Go ahead, Carrie.
Well,
You're going to go to that.
I think also, once you file for divorce and serve, there's these automatic temporary restraining orders that are put in effect that you still owe a duty to your spouse, even though you are separated, and you can't take the funds out and unilaterally decide that you're going to invest it in something. So if you do that, you are correct. Then you would just be charged with taking that money out because you have reached the automatic temporary restraining orders. You can use the money for the normal course of business for necessary expenses, but you can't change the investment style unilaterally.
Well, I'm going to add another one, which tells you why you need a good lawyer for these questions, because they're going to ask, what if? And a lot of these questions we're asked enable us to make a complete and correct answer. Because what if they spent the $200,000 and bought crypto and it went up to $1 million? Mm-hmm. Same answer? No. Because in that situation, if somebody invests the money and they lose it, they lost all of their money, and the other spouse has to be made whole. Conversely, if they invest the community property money and they win, that win is half belongs to the other spouse. So you get half if you win, you get it all if you lose in that scenario.
And as everyone listening or watching, you can see that these questions, everything that we do at Custody Queens and Holstrom Block and Park is we create a customized case strategy. So we obviously during our consultation we would get into a lot more details than a general question. But Dane's right. You got to hire a right attorney, the right fit for you, your case, your family, and you need to hire someone that is familiar with these type of issues, and hire the forensic accountant right on the onset when you have complex issues. But we at Custody Queens and Holstrom Block and Park, we are not a one-size-fits-all. So we take each question, each case, each client, and customize it to what their needs are and what is best for them. So don't wait, make the call, fill out the intake form. Now, we're getting close, but I have Jeffrey from Pasadena. He emailed, "Hello, Custody Queens. I have a question. My ex-wife was an authorized user on my credit cards. However, when I told her I was going to file for divorce, she maxed out all my cards. Now I have all this debt. I feel this is unfair to me. Is there any recourse I can take?"
Well, first off, the most classic example of that one is, yeah, she maxed out his credit card paying for her attorney. Yes. That's the one we all see. I'll let somebody else answer the substantive question.
Well, so once he told her that he was going to file for divorce, that would in essence establish a date of separation, that as of that date, they are living separate and apart. And so any debts that either party incurs after that date of separation would be their separate responsibility. Now, there's often times that we might have to get Jack involved for credit cards and looking at it, things charged for living expenses where they're living together, things charged for the benefit of a child that we have to establish that maybe are both their responsibility, and then things that would go to one side or the other, such as a shopping spree, or as Dane suggested, their own individual attorney. So you have to have maybe a forensic accountant work with the client and look at those statements to see where the different pots of the charges and things would fall into.
The short version is that if it's for a separate property use, like hiring an attorney, then his spouse would be responsible to pay that portion of the bill. But the problem is that you may not get that court ruling for a year or two or more, meaning you're still making the monthly payments and paying the interest and things like that. So once again, have a good attorney, and if necessary, depending on the complexity, a credit card might not be a Jack White kind of hire, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they pitch not only for the principal balance that was used, but every dime in interest that you had to pay for 2 years at 18% interest on maxing out your credit card.
So yeah, in a nutshell, if you're going to tell someone that you're filing for divorce, you need to make sure that you have, a plan and an action. So sometimes things like this don't happen.
And that date of separation concept is really important for me, because that is the end date of what is happening in the marriage. Anything before that, it would be joint community money, both debt as well as income. And after that date, we'd be looking at separate income and separate debt.
I have to do my usual thing, which is add the watch out. The classic scenarios just as they've been talking about, but it is also not unusual for husbands and wives to reconcile.
I was just going to bring
and they live together for another year after she maxed out the credit card for something. And now the question becomes, was that really a separate property charge?
And what if they're separated but still living together?
Well, then are they really separated?
And that's the $1 million question.
Yeah. And that's often very litigated. I've had cases where there's a 2-year difference between their dates of separation, and we're reading over text messages and talking about the intimate details of their life to establish where they separated.
Yeah, we're getting a little off topic, but the classic example there is you hear the horrible, see the horrible emails of you're a horrible person, yada, 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 followed 6 months later by, I'll always love you.
Yes.
So.
And that's a whole nother show.
Yes, it is.
So I want to end this conversation and just on kind of a fun note, and just kind of show a little bit of our human side. We're not just attorneys and forensic accountants. We are here with you through this process. So everyone's going to get 30 seconds to tell our listeners, what would each of you tell your younger self? And we're going to start with me. I'll do it first, because you guys all look like your deer headlights over here.
Oh yeah, you spring that on. It's just like.
But I love this because it's a nice way to end such a really good conversation between 4 very educated people. But I would tell my younger self, if you are afraid of failure, or you are avoiding things because you're afraid you're going to fail, then you are also avoiding success. So don't be afraid. Own it. Be yourself. Be unique, and do it.
I'm going to step off from that and say something very similar. I happened to be having a conversation with my son not too long ago along the same vein. And it's more of what would I have told my younger self, or what would I have done differently? And I was explaining I probably should have or would have taken more risks, because the risk not taken is just something not gained. So it's something I should have done. I'm trying to do more of, as being here is one of those things. It's a little outside my comfort zone.
You were doing awesome. You're like just part of the crew now.
Yeah. But I appreciate you having me back.
I think we'll have you on quarterly now. So,
okay.
Back with Jack White.
I'd do that again.
All right, Carrie, what would you tell your younger Carrie self?
I've thought about that a lot because I have two daughters that are in law school. So they look at them and I go, that is my younger self, because they're somewhat following in my footsteps, but much bigger, more impressive steps than I took. But I do tell them to take chances, take risks, and just work hard when you're young and you're able to do it. Have fun, but work hard to put in the work, because it pays off when you need it later in life.
I love that too. All right, what would Dane tell Dane Jr.?
I got two. Okay, I got two. But the first one kind of parallels what you were all saying, and that is, don't let other people dictate what you could do in your life, because it's sometimes, oh my God, that's such a risky thing. Oh my God, that's such a terrible thing. Yada yada. Oh, I would never do that. When you hear that, if you let that affect your thought processes, then you'll never do jack. No pun intended. Okay. Okay. And the second one that I really have come to really be where I am today, and that is value the people around you. It is the people around you that will make you reach your dreams. And sorry, Elon, but that's the way it comes down.
And that is a perfect way to sum up our show. Take risks. Don't be afraid. Keep your circle tight. Hire the right people. And never forget to
let love rule.